it's been a year, thanks, and I'm.
Your meeting didn't have a started like your fellowships.
Oh.
So.
It's a pointer for this, so the rule is, because you're.
Because I'm-
Chairs, right?
There is no chair.
You have to-
Elect a chair.
You still have both.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Karen Johnson. I'm the city recorder for the City of Independence. And our chair is out this evening. He's not able to make it tonight. And our co-chair is attending via Zoom. And it's actually something that we're going to need to have an in-person chair. So I'm calling the meeting to order for the purpose of electing a temporary chair for this meeting. Do any of the commissioners present? So is somebody going to nominate somebody to be chair?
I'll nominate Evan.
Okay,
I second.
okay. So there's been moved and seconded to have Evan as temporary chair. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries, and Evan, come take your place.
Leave that secret then.
Well, thanks, Karen, and thanks, everyone. Yes, my name is Evan Source, and I'm the temporary chair of the planning commission. And we'll get right into business with a roll call.
Jordan Carpenter is not present. Sally Cohen,
Present by Zoom.
Becky J,
Present.
Jose Oliveros,
Present.
Alex Froskovus,
Here.
and Evan Source.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Chair Chappelle called to say that he wasn't going to be able to attend.
All right, thank you, Karen. All right, so we're moving to agenda item number 3, the minutes from October 7th. 2024, so minutes are in your docket, and I would entertain a motion for approval.
And that we approve the minutes of last month's meeting.
There's a second. Second. So it's been moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes of the October 7th, 2024 planning commission. Is there any discussion?
Evan,
Yeah,
this is Sally. I won't be voting on the minutes because I missed the meeting, just for the record.
I also missed the meeting, so
Robert's rules does allow for you to vote, it should you decide you would like to, so.
Oh, okay. All right.
thank you, so. So it's been moved and seconded in discussion, so we'll do the vote. All those who support the motion on the table, please say aye.
Right.
Aye. Aye. Any nays? Right, motion passes. All right, so moving to agenda item 4, visitors or public comment. Karen, do we have any public comment?
I'm doing.
So come up here and you can speak at the mic just right there. And Jose did say that if you would like to speak in Spanish, he would help translate. Yeah, speak into the, I can help you pull it down just a little bit. I don't know how it pulls down, maybe like that.
Buenas tardes. José, le quería preguntar, yo estoy tratando de poner una cerca en mi casa. Primero compré material sin saber que el material que compré ya no es permitido en zonas residenciales. Entonces necesito no sé, de ayuda de aquí para ver si me pueden aprobar que pueda usar ese tipo de cerca, porque pues ya gasté miles de dólares en el material y ya no me lo quieren recibir y ahora ya no sé qué hacer.
Primero, ¿cuál es su nombre?
María Ríos Nájar.
Her name is Maria Rios Najar. And she basically said that she plans to put a fence into her residence. And she's purchased a lot of material and she would like to know the way to have material to be approved for her fence.
Right. And so, I mean, so essentially, I had talked with Maria, right? And basically the issue is this, we do not allow chain link fences for residential homes in the city of Independence. They bought a whole bunch of material to put in a chain link fence. And submitted the application. And I mean, because we don't allow it, they said, unfortunately, this is not allowed. I told her that I would talk to the city manager, which I did. We didn't see any option to get around it via the existing code, but I told her that she could come and talk to you folks about potentially changing the code to allow chain link in the city of Independence if you folks were interested in pursuing that option. And that's why she's here tonight.
¿Sí entendió?
Sí, sí, más o menos. Sí, sí, entendí. Me es más difícil hablarlo.
She understood it. It's what you said.
Y también le quería preguntar si, es que yo no sabía que no era permitido, por eso lo hicimos así. Y como yo miro cerca de ese estilo, de ese tipo alrededor de mi área, de mi vecindad, entonces nunca imaginé que eso no fuera permitido.
Yeah, so she didn't know that a material was not allowed. And she said that since she lived in an industrial area, she was under the assumption that material was allowed for residences.
So where is your home?
¿Dónde vives? ¿Dónde está tu vida?
Por la Walnut en la Walnut. No, en Walnut en Walnut, right? Walnut.
Walnut Street.
Y si yo quisiera saber si pudieran cambiar ese código para que me sea permitido, si hay algo que hacer, porque pues ya no me quieren recibir el material y pues yo ya gasté varios miles de dólares, entonces ahora estoy como pues necesito hacer algo o voy a perder todo ese dinero que no tengo extra para perder. ¿Me entiendes?
She'd like to request the planning commission to change the code regulation. Because there's not, she basically purchased all this material that she's not able to return.
Yeah, so if this is something that you folks would like to pursue, then I would encourage you to essentially direct me to start pursuing such a code change. This is not something that you would like to pursue. I mean, I guess the code would stay the same, so essentially that's what Maria is here tonight to ask you folks. Is a code impossible, or would the planning commission want to change the code to allow something like that? Her instance is, I mean, she's exactly right, she's not in an industrial area, but she's very close to the industrial area. Less than a block from her house is Forest River, the industrial site, which is wrapped by chain link fence. So,
Well, I was just trying to figure out how close to industrial area you were, and that's what's around you. Are we able to make an exception on a particular piece of property, or do you have to change the code for everybody?
I don't see how we could make an exception for one property. based on how the code is written right now.
Fred, do we have the ability, to get a little more information about the history of why this is not allowed and maybe have a hearing about this at a later date?
Yeah, I mean, that would be how a code change
Right.
would work is that, that we would have to have a hearing to actually change the code.
Sí, el presidente preguntó que si hay manera de que podamos investigar la historia, por qué se prohibió esta materia.
Yo también quería preguntarle cómo es posible si todo mi área alrededor tiene esa cerca. Es lo que hay alrededor de mi casa, entonces yo cómo voy a imaginarme que, claro, no investigué como de leyes ni nada, pero cómo voy a imaginarme que eso no está permitido si es lo que yo miro en mi alrededor.
Yeah, she's saying that, so as a visual observation, this material, what is within sight, so that's why she.
Yeah,
She made the assumption that it was allowed for residencies.
Right,
Is there fencing there now?
Actualmente hay cerca,
No, apenas la quiero poner por primera vez. Pues, como le digo, yo ya compré el material, no me lo quieren recibir y ahora pues estoy que no sé qué hacer.
she wants to put it on, and because of the fact that she's already paid for materials, and they don't want to accept, return.
Well. You know, I for one would be interested in having a hearing about this and learning more about the history and how this would impact the city, as well as super sympathetic to this situation. For the folks, what do other folks think?
I would be fine, I would like to learn some more history and figure out what issues are involved.
Y de no hacer la solicitud para tener una audiencia acerca de la historia de por qué se prohibió esta materia.
Entonces, ahora, ¿qué puedo hacer yo? ¿Esperar a que tomen una decisión o que estudien sobre eso o qué hago ahora, por ahora?
So as of today, what can she do to see when this hearing will take place? Was there an appeal process that she can do?
so if we were to do a hearing, I mean, it would be. I mean, unfortunately, it's gonna be at least a month, before a hearing, just because a code change would have to be drafted into the Department of Land and Conservation. For the code change, so unfortunately, all we can do at this point is wait. So if I were to get on this tomorrow, it would be at the hearing would be at your meeting in January.
Que bueno, hoy se tendría que esperar para hacer los cambios a los códigos y ya habrá una audiencia empezando en enero, porque tendría que ser una aprobación con el Departamento de Conservación de Bienes.
Ah, ok. Pues yo puedo esperar un poco más, pero sí me gustaría que lo consideren, que sea posible lo que yo pido, porque como le digo, pues todo lo que tengo alrededor eso hay. Entonces yo siento como, ¿por qué yo no puedo? ¿Me entienden? Entonces me gustaría que pues si por favor pudieran considerar eso.
You can please consider, I'm willing to wait, but you can do it as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the best that we're gonna be able to do, so.
Pero la audiencia. Gracias.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you. So, Rob, do you need a motion or do you kind of have?
Oh, no, I think that's clear enough.
All right, thank you, but
Chair, can I ask a quick
I
question?
think Alex has some feedback.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alex.
yeah, thank you. I was just gonna say I could see,
Alex, hold on a second, you're really faint in here, so we're getting Karen to turn up the sound. Okay,
Yeah, sorry,
it's all right.
I don't know.
Put the mic next to the.
Yeah,
Hey, Alex, can you?
can can you hear me okay now?
Barely, but if everybody's,
Okay,
I'll get them up a little louder.
all right. Well, I'm sitting in a hotel room, so I don't want to necessarily all my neighbors to hear.
I hear you.
I was gonna say that I could foresee for something like that for a code change to allow in almost like a transitional zone or something like that on, something that abuts an industrial property or something. I don't know what it looks like, but just for food for thought.
Is that possible, Fred, to just do it in one specific area?
Well, I mean, Councilmember Core right here was showing there are portions of town where chain link is fairly common. So like perhaps trying to generate a standard related to something like that. Is something that we can do. I gotta think about it a little bit, and I think that might be a way to go. So.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Any other public comments? All right, moving forward. Doesn't look like we have staff reports, presentations, or unfinished business, so we'll go to new business. Is that correct, Fred?
That's correct.
All right, so I gotta read some required script here, so. And this is my first time, as you just witnessed, so sorry. So that hefty packet to read. Hello, I am Evan Soares, the temporary chair of the planning commission and chairperson for this hearing. I am now opening a public hearing on a conditional use permit file number CU 202401. The date is November 4th, 2024, and it is 7:21 p.m. This hearing is being recorded. The hearing today is a type 2 application for locating a church on South 9th Street. The applicant is Wally Wildman for Christ the King Church. This hearing is considered a quasi-judicial hearing. That means that the planning commission must make a decision that is based on the evidence presented and the applicable code provisions, follow rules in order to protect the constitutional due process rights of the parties, determine whether the application satisfies the applicable criteria as presented or can satisfy the applicable criteria with conditions, and support its decision with the findings of fact. The applicable substantive criteria that applies to this application are Independent Development Codes section subchapter 11, administrative provisions subchapter 21, medium density zone subchapter 71, conditional uses in subchapter 80, site design review. These are contained in the written staff report and will be identified and discussed in the oral staff report provided at this hearing. All right, your testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or the city's development code that you believe apply to this application. Do I have to cite these ORSs in the script?
no,
No, okay, great. The evidence that the planning commission will rely on to make a decision is not subject to the rules of evidence used in court. Evidence will be accepted if it is applicable to the criteria and is the kind of evidence that a reasonable, prudent person would rely on in making important personal decisions. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on the proposal. Such issues must be raised in the accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the planning commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to the issues. Failure to do so may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals of a decision on this application based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions or approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city to respond to the issues precluded in action for damages in circuit court. The individual making an argument has the burden of proving their point. In other words, base your argument on evidence or explain why it is relevant to the applicable criteria. The planning commission is prohibited from making a decision based merely on feelings or opinion. The ultimate burden of proving that all applicable criteria are satisfied falls on the applicant. The applicant must meet this burden based on preponderance of evidence. The record for this hearing consists of all materials submitted by the applicant, comments received to the date and through this hearing, and a staff report. If you have comments or evidence that you would like to be specifically considered in the decision, then you must formally provide that evidence or argument during the hearing, either in written or an oral presentation. You may request to keep the record open after this public hearing, but you must make the request before the record closes. Or, the applicant always gets the last word and will have 7 days to close of this hearing to submit final written arguments, unless the applicant waives that right. If you intend to present oral testimony, please fill out a request to speak form located at the back of the room and give that to city staff. Again, we are recording this hearing, so please also state your name, spell it if you think that is necessary, and provide your city of residence. This will help in preparing accurate written minutes of the hearing and also assist with mailing copies of the decision to all interested parties. If you have written testimony or other evidence to submit, please give that to staff so it can be entered into the record. Given the number of people present, we ask that without two exceptions, each speaker limit themselves to no more than 5 minutes. Please remember that all presentations will be timed. You will be informed when your allotted time has expired. All speakers exceeding the time limit will be asked by the chair to immediately conclude his or her remarks. If you do not finish your presentation in time allotted, be sure to provide a written copy of your statement to staff. The applicant will not be limited to 3 minutes. In order to minimize repetitive testimony, organizations are encouraged to have only one person speak for the group, with other members of the organization standing to show their support. Each person may testify only once unless called back to the podium at the request of a planning commission member to respond to the question. Thank you for your cooperation. Right. Conflicts of interest, ex parte contact, and bias. Because this is a quasi judicial hearing, the applicant has a right to an impartial decision-making body. Impartial means that the members of the planning commission have not perjured the application and are open to hear and consider all evidence and arguments presented, do not have any conflicts of interest, and have not had non-disclosed ex parte contacts. All members of the planning commission are required to disclose any conflicts of interest and ex parte contacts that we have had or had with the proposed or applicant. Proposal or applicant, that is, whether we have any financial or other personal interest in the proposal, and whether we have spoken with anybody about the proposal outside of this hearing. Do any planning commission members wish to disclose for the record any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or bias? Seeing none. Does anyone wish to challenge the planning commissioner's impartiality, or any of the disclosures made by the planning commissioners? Seeing none.
Hey, Chair, I do believe we don't need to go through this number 4 here.
Great.
Because we have two folks in the audience to speak on it. Essentially, how the hearing's gonna go is the chair will open the hearing, I'll give a staff report, you folks can respond. Any questions can be asked. The chair will essentially close the hearing at a certain point, and then they'll make the decision on the proposal. So yeah,
Great. So I guess we now hear from,
you can open the hearing,
I will open the hearing.
or did you open the hearing already? And whatever.
The hearing is not open.
Either it's open or just now open or it was open a while ago. Either way, I am here to present, my name is Fred, and I'm here to present about Christ the King Church moving to 580 South 9th Street. The building used to be occupied by Robinson Cabinets. It's an interesting building that sort of, it's in the medium density residential zone, but it's right next to industrial property. Right to the south is the old mill site. And just to the west of it is this big industrial looking building that occupies an entire site. they're proposing to go into what is currently a residential zone, but I would argue kind of has an industrial feel. And they're proposing to change that building into a church. You will note that, as the chair said, this application is subject to the Independence Comprehensive Plan in subchapters 11, 12, 71, and 80. I have outlined those items in the staff report for this proposal. Just a couple of things that I'll call out. On page 9, I went through sort of the conditions for granting a conditional use. And some of the things that I look for and sort of would encourage us all to consider as we're thinking of a church in a residential area. There's potential parking, roadway impacts, there's potential noise impacts, and there's potential scale impacts. Based on my analysis of this, I mean, they're effectively addressing parking on the site. What you'll note is one of the conditions that that our city engineer wants is to tie the parking lot to the street in a particular way. So there's essentially driveways on both 9th and F Street. The goal of that is to make sure that folks don't back from the parking directly into the street. That could be a potential hazard. You'll note also that just basic things like the comments from our city engineer are included as a condition in this. I also included as a condition potential noise impacts. Just be mindful of your neighbors with things like music and whatnot. So that is some of the things that I noted on page 9. You'll also note that going through the item, there's conditions, going through the packet, you'll note that there's things related to things like lighting. All lighting, condition 4 recommends that all lighting be shielded and directly downward. Again, that's partially one of those things, be a good neighbor. Also, conditions 5 deal with getting stormwater approved by the city. City engineer specifically, condition 6 talks about signage, condition 7 talks about signage. And then condition 8 talks about screening all the storage areas and all sort of mechanical equipment on the building. Basically, in short, this proposal seems very appropriate for the spot that it's located. It is it's got industrial, the large building that occupies the whole site to the west is actually zoned. It's either light industrial or heavy industrial. Directly to the south of it is zoned, and I included that in that. Directly to the south of it is zoned heavy industrial. Directly to the west of it is zoned light industrial. This is sort of like a peninsula in that situation, and it was occupied by a former industrial use. So this wouldn't be like changing a house to a church. This is like changing basically a former industrial use to a church. And as such, it feels very appropriate for the location that they're proposing it, given the conditions that are suggested. Based on that, I would recommend approval of it with those conditions.
So, thank you, Fred. May I ask a question?
You betcha.
So, I would assume at a cabinet making facility, there was industrial noise coming from the facility. They were making cabinets there, correct?
They were making cabinets in there. I never went and like put my ear against the building, so I don't know exactly how much.
I would be a little surprised if the church is louder than cabinet making.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree.
Okay.
Basically, the standards that I put in there are just the standards that we have within our within that site design review section. Yep.
Are there any other questions from Commissioner Becky?
I wanted to say that also to the east of the building is also commercial. There's another woodworking facility east across 9th Street. And I had some questions about the parking lot.
Yeah,
Because as it is now, it's just, there are no sidewalks, there's no curbing, there's no indication of where the street is and where the parking is, or where the property line begins actually. So I read that the city wants some sort of barrier put up. Are we talking about just cement?
yeah, and I feel like that's, the way that I wrote that in there is, once they tie it to the street with a driveway or whatever, a 20-foot wide driveway to essentially do something that satisfies the city engineer to ensure that there's no driving over. Cause there's a stormwater facility in that little green space, to the east side of the site. What we don't wanna have happen is people just driving willy-nilly over that and either backing directly onto the street or driving over that stormwater facility. So really defining where that is and where people are supposed to go as they navigate that parking lot is what the intent of that condition is, condition 1 and 2.
The other question I had in looking at the plan, I didn't quite understand from the, how the parking is being organized. Where is the access to F Street and what, how do you get in and out? I mean, are you backing in from, you come off of F Street and back into these places? Or pull into them, I guess, and then you back out and you're leaving a space between your parking lot and F Street, and that's your access?
Right,
Okay.
exactly, yeah, exactly, and so what we're looking at, cause essentially it has a drive aisle. What we're looking for is get a driveway to the drive aisle, wherever that is. And then use that driveway to get in and out of
It's not the property.
the property, indeed.
I'm kind of surprised. As much as I've heard city personnel say that developers will pay, that the city isn't asking for sidewalks and curbing to be put in.
It's exactly, we had that conversation internally. For one, we have a feeling that the church likely could not pay curb, gutter and sidewalk across the frontage there. And given the fact that it's an existing building, is part of the reason why we were not requiring it at this point.
Because 9th Street is really underdeveloped and not, it's hard to tell where the street is in some places. I mean, how wide is that space and where is the property line and how much is city right away? Because it's just a piece of asphalt going down the middle.
It's very true, and even F Street through that,
Yeah,
that space is,
it's a mishmash of
is,
pieces.
it very much is. Yeah,
Those are my questions.
Those are,
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with our temporary chair mentioned too, about converting from industrial to a church rather than a home to a church. For me, I wanted to ask, would it be, would other community groups be able to rent out the facilities? Or is it just limited to the church members?
that is entirely a question for them. At this point, they're specifically looking for a church facility.
Because when I look at the image on figure 1. I refer to the attachment E, the parking spaces, particularly with the ADA parking spaces. Was wondering, will there be plans to further develop it? So to add some, not so much railing, but to make it more easier
Okay,
for handicap, for other, if it's allowed for other community groups.
right, so the handicap spaces, they absolutely need to provide as part of our building code.
but I think that's a good question to ask the applicant when it's their time around opening up for community spaces. Any other questions from commissioners for the staff?
Chair, this is
Yeah.
Sally. I have a question for Fred. Did you get any feedback or input from anyone in the neighborhood?
I have not, the notice went out, was mailed, to people within 250 feet of the project site. And, Bob over there was kind enough to drive the sign into the ground for me because it was mighty hard when I went out there and I was trying to push it in manually, so so a sign has been up for at least 2 weeks out on the project site. I have not heard anything about or from anybody about this project.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, thank you, Fred. We will now hear testimony from the applicant. Please come up. And if you, just a reminder to introduce yourself for the record, getting your testimony.
I'm Pastor Wally Wildman, and I'm glad to be here this evening. Appreciate your time being here. And I'm pastor of the church. They don't always admit it, but I still am. Anyway, what can I tell? What do you need from me?
Can you, just for the record, put in your residential address too?
My residential address is 1060 Southeast Miller Avenue, Dallas, Oregon, 9753.
Thank you, sir. Jose, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Waldman. So will your facility be available for other community groups to rent or?
Most likely not. We have a legal counsel that advises the way that things are in our society today, that we should not let anyone use our building that's not in agreement with our statement of faith and our code of conduct. So probably not.
Yeah, and regarding the ADA space, the parking spaces as well. So then, do you guys have an intention to further develop, like, put like a pavement to make it easier? Because right now, where the spots are, most of it gravel, right?
No, it's all paved now.
Oh, okay, got it,
Got it. Mr. Wildman, I have a quick question for you. Are you planning to move, if I understand you're downtown right now, correct? Are you planning to move from downtown to this facility, or are you planning to keep both?
No, we're moving
Okay.
out of downtown. The building downtown is no longer sufficient to meet our needs, so.
Okay, and do you all own that building downtown?
No,
Okay,
no, we don't. We were
Okay.
just leasing.
Okay, thank you very much. That was I was just curious about it.
Sure, no problem.
Do we have any other questions from commissioners for the applicant?
And no, our music isn't that loud.
The dogs that used to live just next to you were much louder, I'm sure.
Yes, it is.
Any questions? From folks on Zoom land?
Not for me, thank you.
Yeah, you asked my question, Evan. That was asking, that's the same question.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Woodman. I think that should be sufficient. I don't think seeing that there's no one else here, I don't think we need to do any testimony in favor, correct? Is there any other testimony in favor? I guess I can just ask. All right, anyone neutral? Anyone opposed? All right, city staff summary response to the public testimony.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I should just really emphasize one more thing, so. I think that we would maybe think a little bit different about this application if F Street wasn't a major west, east, west, right route. You know, and so when I say it seems like it's a decent location for it, I mean, I really hit on the zoning and whatnot that's around it. But I mean, the character of the street itself lends to this being a good location for this use. If it were located like, on 6th Street or something like that, that would be harder to get to and would be, then I think we would have a different conversation about this application, but as it is, I feel like this site is about as well suited for this use as any residential lot in the city. So, I guess I wanted to emphasize that.
Fred, I guess I have another additional question for you. Does this nowhere in this conditional use permit do we switch the zoning of this facility? So if in the future, the church decides to move out, an industrial person can move back in?
It's actually a residentially zoned property.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know how Robinson Cabinets started.
That's interesting.
On the site, it's actually residentially zoned, even though it feels more industrial.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I think that clears up some questions too. Do you have, applicant, do you have any rebuttal or anything else you want to add to the record? No? That's okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, and would you like to waive your 7-day, to submit final written argument?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So for the record, the applicant has waived his right, for their 7 days to submit. What else do I have here? All right, I think since the applicant has waived their rights, I think we can go into deliberation and decision. Is that correct?
You bet.
And Chair, if you would also declare the record in the hearing closed.
Oh, thank you. So I declare the record in the hearing closed. All right, we're in deliberation. Is there any more discussion from the planning commission?
Chair, this is Sally. I just want to put on the record, I think these conditions are completely appropriate. And I totally support this.
Thank you, Sally. I would entertain a motion. The motion is I believe in the packet. It's in my script here.
Karen's
We're putting it online. Thank you.
I would move to approve the conditional use application file number CP 2024-01.
Oops, sorry.
Oops. Adopting findings, conditions, and staff recommendations as provided in the staff report.
I'll second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Albert. So there's been a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? No, seeing none, all those who support the motion on the table, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Does that work for you, Karen? I guess I could have asked you to do the roll call.
Oh, no, that's fine, yeah.
Any opposed? All right, motion approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so moving to our next agenda item.
You guys can leave if you want.
Yes, thank you. Central Talent Plan, draft changes to the comprehensive plan and development code. And I'll hand it over to Fred.
Perfect. So, as you folks know, the Central Townage Plan was, a resolution to adopt the Central Townage Plan was passed by the city council. Coming out of that, we are going to do some code changes and some future land use map changes and some comprehensive plan changes. You remember I said there's just a whole bunch of small changes that we're gonna have to make to implement the plan. This packet includes some of these. These are before you for the first time. And if they look good, we'll likely have a public hearing on the materials on December 2nd. So going through the changes little by little, page 37 of your packet, Karen, we go to that. This is the existing future land use map, and when you look at the existing future land use map, you can see just a small area proposed to be changed. That's in the dots there. Going to the next map, you would see that that would change to commercial, or excuse me, mixed use on the next map. Right? Pretty simple. That's sort of what we're going for there. Going to the next document, it's changes to the land use element. This is on page 39 of your packet. What you will note here is I was looking at this, and when we adopted this future land use map, I realized I didn't actually change the designations in the land use and urbanization section, and so you will note that what I am proposing is a simplified description of residential. And then residential single family airport, because currently how it reads is there's 3 designations of residential. It doesn't mention air park at all, and you will note that in the future land use map, we just sort of called it residential and then residential air park, and so going to that approach would just sort of simplify how the language is written. I just propose that to make it more consistent with the future land use map. Going through the document further, I noted that there's just a whole bunch of places. I tried to clean up some language. I also realized that when we did the housing needs analysis, we failed to correct some of the land use table numberings, and so just going through and correcting those numberings. Feel like there's. Oh yeah, and then getting to the end, page 47, sort of where the heart of these changes are related to this. You know, just policy 9 talks about the Southwest Independence Concept Plan. You can tell that that was added when the Southwest Independence Concept Plan was created. I just put and Central Talmadge Plan have been adopted as ancillary documents of this comprehensive plan. Background information and policies within the plans will supersede information in this comprehensive plan in the event of any conflicts between the documents. So really simple change, but you know, it's something that we need to do to make sure that the plan is operative, right? You will note the same sort of thing on page 48, just including that language within the document. Any questions about that so far? Pretty simple. Going to page 50, you will note the transportation element change sort of does something simple. Something similar and simple. Just including the Central Talmadge Plan and the transportation element. Same sort of deal. Going to page 51, you'll note the areas that are proposed to be changed on this map, and you'll note that they're bigger because this is actually a regulatory map. The one is sort of a policy map about where general types of land uses go. This is actually a regulatory map. And so the areas proposed to be changed, you'll note as with the same sort of dotted bounds. Can you just zoom in on those just a little bit, Karen, so we can see them just a little bit? So that's that one that Karen's trying to show you right there. We'll go up just the other way.
What do you mean?
Follow the leader of the, there's a line that points to the dotted area, Karen. Yeah, so that one right there is right behind, Dollar General. It's the Park West Apartments is to the south of it. Dollar General is to the north. It's this weird property zone, medium density, even though it's right next to commercial and high density residential. And then go to the west just a little bit, Karen. Those areas, the one would be zoned mixed density residential. Or excuse me, not mixed, it would be zoned mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial, and then the other one would be zoned high density residential. And on the next map, when you go to page 52, you actually see those changes as they would be made on the map. So a change to the high density residential and then scroll over and the mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial. So that's all pretty straightforward too, I hope. Those are all recommended changes from the Central Talmadge Plan. Page 53 of the document is sort of wrestled with how we're gonna implement some of this stuff, and it makes most sense to me to ensure that when annexations come in, that they're in conformance with the central tonnage plan, and so that's what the change to the annexation section is trying to do. You will note, I switched where the purpose of the master plan requirement is, I put that higher up and pretty certain. And then the second paragraph specifically says, specifically talks about the Southwest plan, however, has been refined in part by the 2024 central tonnage plan, where the central tonnage plan addresses a site or a portion of the site that plan shall govern. So just trying to pull that into that whole annexation language and Southwest independence thing. You will note too on page 54 of the document, of your packet. It talks about high density housing and location shown in the central tonnage plan if applicable. Just trying to pull that in. I also noted it further in the approval criteria, and then similar language on pages 55 and 56. And then lastly, no, not lastly, excuse me. Just in the purpose of subchapter 23, just pulling in the central tonnage plan there as well. And then on page 58, these changes are okay, so part of these changes in 58 are just to make it clear that the mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial zone, when we went to the duplex, when we created the transitional zone, we didn't really make any changes to make it clear that we have a standard mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial and we have a transitional one. That has caused some confusion amongst people, and so footnote 1 is added just to make it clear that this mixed MUPC actually includes two different zones, and for the purpose of the code, we just treat them similarly. Just because we didn't want to add a column that had exactly the same stuff in it, that just didn't make any sense to me. And you will note that the main part of the changes in this section is the footnote 7 that talks about multiple family residential dwellings, all floors. It says footnote 7 on page 60 says standalone apartment buildings are allowed within the MUPC zone in the central tonnage sub-area, so long as the subject property does not directly front Monmouth Street. The property is set along a secondary road such as East Street, 16th or 17th Street. So it's just basically saying you can have all residential building if you're within the mixed use pedestrian friendly zone in the central tonnage area, so long as it's not on Monmouth Street. Is the goal there. That was an intent of the code as well, and then lastly. On page 61, it's that same, or excuse me, on 62, it's just the same sort of thing that got put as footnote 1. In subchapter 30, just really making it clear that the mixed use pedestrian friendly zone includes two different zones. So that's in short the changes. All in all, they're not that complicated, but there's a whole bunch of them just to implement the recommendations of the central tonnage plan. Are there any questions?
Brett,
Have any questions? See Alex.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we, for this one specifically, I think you have to blend everything. I think in the past, when we've tried to do sort of like updates, we've tried to do sort of updates and like revising separately so that it's a little bit cleaner. But I think this one is so intermixed that this is seems about the only way to go about it. So I commend you for delving all the way through all of this and fixing all the sort of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I concur with Alex. Thank you for all that work.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where it's like, oh, this will be simple, and then get into it, it was just like, there's so much of this stuff all over the place, like.
I think I mean, I guess initially my preference is always like to try to make things really clear. So it's like, okay, if we're gonna update this map, we'll update the map. And then if we're gonna go through and fix like footnotes and things, we'll do that separately. But like I said, I think for this, it's also jumbled and complicated that it's just gonna be one shot and it's all kind of intertwined. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else?
I don't see parking.
Brett, do we need a motion?
No, this will come back before you at your meeting in December.
Great. Well, all right, well, that is the main part of our agenda there. Is there any other informational items?
Yeah, we got a video.
All right, great.
Actually, I just have one comment.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking it'll get corrected, but it doesn't. On your maps of the city, you find the one that shows it really nicely. Just because I'm in Inspiration Garden, Mountain Fir Park quite often, you don't show its actual boundaries. It comes all the way down to Beacon Avenue, and you don't show it that way on your maps.
It's interesting because it's apparently not zoned right then, and so next time we do I mean, it means that it's zoned medium density residential, and so if we did, but you remember maybe a couple of years ago at this point, we went through and we changed a whole bunch of residential lots, or we changed a whole bunch of lots that were zoned wrong. And so potentially that's one of the ones next time we do that we pull Inspiration Garden to its proper extent.
Because it's all, I guess it was all part of the lay down yard for the Mountain Fir company. So it was, the residential areas are to the east side of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I have one other question before we get to your movie, or your video, which is, going back to the chain link fence. So currently, it's not legal to our code to have a chain link fence. Do we have? I mean, in the scheme of things, we have like one code enforcement person on staff right now. So the reality is we have people doing it and there's not any real way we can enforce the code, except for you saying no to fences. Is that?
I would tend to say that that's fairly accurate. We're a complaint driven code enforcement place, so if somebody puts up chain link and their neighbor doesn't like it, then they could say, my neighbor put up chain link, and then we gotta do something about it, right? So I mean, there's that as well.
Okay.
And there is chain link in a large part of, or in several parts of our town now. I mean, now obviously it was done before you.
Yeah, and we allow chain link in like industrial areas, or even, I think even commercial areas.
But I see it on residential areas too, so it must be grandfathered in.
Even in our neighborhood, I see.
Yeah.
A few places, so,
Yeah,
okay, thank you, that helps.
yeah,
So, to the video.
the video. Can't remember what this one's about, but I saw it today, I thought that's good.
Okay, so bear with me while I'm gonna get this figured out and then be gone.
You're gonna be leaving.
Yeah, okay, so.
Advertisement for Cincinnati.
No.
Courtesy of the state independence.
No, put it over here so that way they can see it. And then,
Actually, I have a quick question while we're waiting.
Yeah.
Well, I forgot to let my fellow commissioners know that last month was National Planning Month. But also since 2025 was just around the corner, it'll be here before we know it. Do you have any indication of any proposals for next year for legislative session regarding zoning changes, zoning laws?
you know, you're talking about what we're gonna be doing in the next year?
The legislature.
The legislature, I don't know much about legislation that's getting talked about at this point. I do know that we're gonna have to make some code changes related to legislation that happened last year. Typically, at the end of the year, I like to talk about accomplishments that we've had over the last year, things that we've done. So we'll probably talk about that next time, and we'll probably do some looking forward to next year, but honestly, I haven't given much thought about what we're gonna do next year at this point. I do know that we have a consultant on board to help us think about infill, and how we do infill in the community, so that's gonna be one project that we're doing this next year. I think we definitely have to do something about limited land use decisions and Senate Bill 1537. I just don't know what that looks like quite yet. I haven't got my head around it. So,
Sorry, I'll get here. What's that? I gotta share. I'm gonna share screen 1. Share the sound. Share.
Toothpaste goes inside the tooth and calms the nerve down. And my patients say, you know, doc, it really works.
You'll get better when you're not blamed for.
In this low-lying car I drive in, I've been noticing something lately. When I'm sitting in traffic, I either can't see past the cars in front of me, or the cars around me are towering over me. And it turns out there's a big reason for that. The production of passenger cars like sedans and wagons for sale in the US has been in free fall since 1975. And in their place has been the steady growth in the production of SUVs. Last year, SUVs and trucks made up 80% of all new car sales. Compare that to 52% in 2011. The fact that Americans like big cars probably won't shock anyone. They are everywhere, even in my parking scarce neighborhood in Brooklyn. But the reasons behind this transformation are more than just cultural. It all goes back to a 50-year-old policy that would kick off a huge shift in the way US cars are designed. So I'm driving from my home in Brooklyn, New York to a beach in Rhode Island for a summer vacation. And along the way, I'm going to piece together why big cars took over America. New York was the 45th state to officially succumb to the takeover of SUVs and trucks in 2014, according to this Washington Post analysis. Alaska was the first state to go big car dominant in 1988. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for things I should look out for while I'm on the road.
Anywhere that you stop, count the number of SUVs versus the number of passenger cars.
Okay, we're in the Costco parking lot filled with SUVs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 SUVs in a row. I think that is my new record. So once you learn about how much big cars dominate the road, it's like you can't unsee it. People have lots of reasons for choosing a big car, and certainly the infrastructure in the US supports that choice. Unlike a lot of other countries, our built environment revolves around cars. We have wide roads and wide, plentiful parking spaces, and homes with plenty of parking. I arrived in Connecticut, a state that succumbed to light truck dominance in 2016, and pulled into a rest stop where I interviewed Thomas Bochenek, who was on a cross-country road trip with his wife.
It's very comfortable. Okay, to drive. Well, I think the bigger the car, the more you have a feeling of security. You know, the smaller the car, you know, the more likely I think about getting into an accident and being hurt. It has no trouble pulling this almost 7,000-pound trailer.
In other countries, one deterrent for big cars is that they cost so much to fill up with gas. But due to low taxes on gas in the US, fuel is extremely cheap compared to other countries. But there's another overlooked bias towards big cars related to why SUVs exist in the first place. In the 1970s, there was a shortage of foreign oil in the US.
1973 dramatized U.S. dependence on foreign oil.
So the US government set rules for automakers to start making cars more fuel efficient to lessen our dependence on the whims of the global oil market. By 1985, new cars had to get 27.5 miles per gallon, or roughly double their fuel efficiency. These new rules applied to cars like sedans and station wagons under a category known as passenger cars. But there were types of vehicles the US government exempted from these rules, things like pickup trucks, which everyday drivers weren't really driving at the time.
And the idea was if these are working vehicles used by, farmers, construction crews, companies that are hauling freight, those vehicles need to be able to do their job without being choked by emissions controls and without being held to unrealistic fuel economy standards.
So passenger cars got one set of strict rules, and this other category, called light trucks, got another set of more relaxed standards. This regulation created an incentive for car makers to transform light trucks into a vehicle for everyday use. Put in a radio, lots of cargo space, and comfy seats, and voila, that's how we got the SUV.
Okay, girls, we're off in our new Jeep Cherokee. Because behind that classic appearance, it's rugged and powerful.
An automaker needs to spend less money and less time on fuel economy and emissions improvement if they're making and selling an SUV because it falls under a category that is less stringently regulated.
We had the Wagoneer, but it was very low volume, very bespoke, very expensive. So only a very few people bought it. People that lived in Manhattan would go to the Hamptons or go to northern New York State to go skiing. And that's how the SUV started off life.
This is Ralph Gilles, head of design at Stellantis, a conglomerate of car companies that includes Jeep. One of the early SUVs was the Chevy Blazer, built on the frame of the Chevy S10 truck. This is the traditional definition of an SUV, if it was built on the frame of a truck. And to meet the legal definition of a light truck, it had to have some clearance angles and dimensions just right.
Taking a utilitarian vehicle and turning it into almost a premium luxury device that happened to be utilitarian. Then comes the Grand Cherokee.
The Jeep Grand Cherokee was built the way passenger cars are, in one piece, or unibody. These two types of car constructions, frame-based and unibody, today form the distinction between traditional SUVs and the new, increasingly popular category of crossover.
They're more efficiently packaged, you don't have the frame.
The Grand Cherokee was part of the early success story of SUVs in the 90s and 2000s, one that continues today. This bias towards light trucks is why a company like Volkswagen, which once sold primarily passenger cars, has discontinued a lot of them today, like the Passat, in favor of SUVs and crossovers. And they've stopped producing all of their wagons, including the Jetta wagon I'm in. And a company like Ford has stopped producing all of their passenger cars except for the iconic Mustang. Okay, I'm gonna see if anyone at this car dealership will talk to me.
Buick was always car, really. It was mostly sedans. And then just with the market shift, we actually don't even sell a Buick sedan anymore. They don't even make a Buick sedan. It's all crossovers.
When was the last time you guys carried like a Buick passenger car?
It was like 3 or 4 years ago.
And how many did you have on the lot?
Like 1 to 100 of SUVs. We're here to sell cars, and we want to sell what people want. If they were here and people didn't want them, I'm glad they're not here anymore,
So this chart starts to make a lot more sense. 1975 was the year these fuel economy standards for sedans and wagons were passed, the same ones that didn't apply as strictly to SUVs and trucks.
It's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing because the automakers have been marketing SUVs more preferentially than passenger cars. They've been putting more research and development into creating more models that fit into the SUV category. And they've made it so that it's an easier decision to get into an SUV than it is to get into a passenger car.
As of 2016, our fuel economy standards shifted. Vehicles are still separated by the stricter standard for passenger cars and looser standard for light trucks. But within those categories, there are more breakdowns. Regulators multiply a car's wheelbase length by its width to get a footprint. And larger cars within each category get weaker rules. That means that car makers are not only incentivized to phase out passenger cars in their fleet, but they are pushed to make each category bigger. The Toyota Camry got both longer and wider, and the Toyota RAV4 did too. I've now reached Rhode Island, the very last state in the country to go light truck dominant. We have started the inevitable transition to electric vehicles, but
If you're still talking about a larger vehicle with higher ground clearance that's heavier and taller, it's still going to be less energy efficient, whether it's an electric car or an internal combustion powered car.
one sobering impact of big cars is the threat it poses to pedestrians. One study found that replacing the growth in SUVs with cars would have averted over 1,000 pedestrian deaths. People on foot get hit higher and in more vulnerable regions when hit by an SUV or a truck rather than a passenger car. Before hitting the beach, I stopped at my friend Kevin Wright's house. He's bucked the SUV trend and drives a Honda Fit, a car that was discontinued in 2020.
We had our daughter about 17 months ago. It's just kind of making sure that everybody has enough space to be comfortable as well as being safe. It gets good gas mileage and thinking about long-term, climate change is happening. What can we do to minimize our carbon footprint as much as we can? So we were thinking about a second car, maybe getting an SUV in that situation, but ultimately decided to kind of go the other direction and got an e-bike.
You have arrived. Even though we're in Rhode Island, which was the last holdout for SUV dominance, there is still a lot of SUVs here. I'm curious if you think there's any political will or urgency to change this trend towards bigger cars.
That's something that has environmental concerns. It's something that has economic concerns with how much we are reliant on oil. It also has to do with safety, pedestrian safety, cyclist safety. So there is a desire among younger people and more politically active people to try to make it so that an SUV is not the default vehicle choice for American families.
The US is unlikely to become a small car country anytime soon. But this dramatic transition to big cars wasn't just about consumer choice. It was enabled by policy choice. So if we want our roads to look different, we could try and start there.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that the video spoke to me is I've been wanting to show you, there's this lady who wrote a book called, I forgot the name of the book, but essentially it talks about it talks about a lot of pedestrian deaths and just like what contributes to pedestrian deaths. And she really hit on the large car hitting people in more vulnerable areas, and she actually had a picture of her little daughter standing in front of a big truck within the book, and it just, when you see stuff like that, it's just like, oh, I get it, and so I have been wanting to play you. There's a really good one where a guy brings out a crash test dummy and just hits them with various cars, and it's really funny. But I thought, like this captures that idea, and I think the reason that it spoke to me is just recently my boy totaled her car. Right, and so I went out and I was looking for a new car, and I so wanted a Honda Fit, and I guess I didn't realize that they stopped making Honda Fits.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what in the world? Like, people love this car. Why would Honda stop making this car? And so realizing some of the stuff behind it, I thought, oh, this is interesting, and it captures the whole vehicle height and pedestrian death that I've been wanting to show you guys.
Driving a Ford Focus 20 years, I'm on my third Ford Focus. The last two were used cars, because you can't buy any Ford Focus anymore. So my thought is my next car will probably be an SUV, but I don't want an SUV either. So we're becoming a nation of people who want smaller cars, buying used cars over new cars.
As the resident car guy, I'm on a 1,500-mile road trip right now in a Miata. So let me tell you about little cars and trying to dice through traffic. Call me if anybody needs car help. That's my plug. Happy to help.
It's interesting because this year we bought my brother a Super Forester. And when we got insurance, they don't classify it as an SUV, they
Light
classify it as a wagon. Which I thought was interesting, but also like in other countries, the car manufacturers will come out with models. That are more like a car with like truck features, I think they call them like utes. I mean, like El Camino, the old El Camino, El Ranchero, but like in a modern take.
Also, it's fun to note that Europe has pedestrian safety standards. So hood for cars sold in the European market, they have to have like a sloping hood. There's a certain angle so that if there is a pedestrian strike, that the pedestrian is sort of like, I'm not going to say cushioned, but at least minimize damage to pedestrian, which also ruins car design, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, and Oregon is under a mandate by 2030, no new gas powered cars, so that might also impact the size of said cars on the new market. The used market will be different, so it'll be interesting to see how that, if that does change, because they allude to that even the electric cars are larger than historically cars for this country. So interesting conversations.
Yeah, no, what Alex was saying about the slope of the hood, apparently, and you know, just the height of where the impact occurs. If it's lower, you roll over the front of the car, whereas if it's higher, you're stuck under the car, right? And you just don't, I mean, you don't think about that when you're buying a car, you know?
Some of us do think about that.
I missed it, Alex, what did you say?
I said some of us do think about that.
All right, well, thank you for the video, Fred. Any other announcements that are good in the order before we adjourn?
Oh, yes, there is one, I wrote a parent thing. You folks are invited to another joint meeting next Tuesday for the housing production strategy. That is, I can't remember when that will be, but Karen will send it. Is that before the meeting or it's gotta be before the meeting, right? It's before the meeting, so it's probably at 5:30. Right, we'll say 5:30, Karen will confirm it and send it out.
Tuesday the 12th?
Tuesday the
That is
12th.
also my birthday, so what a great way to spend my birthday.
Excellent, well, you will be before the council meeting. So it will be capped at a maximum of, you will be out of there by at least 6:30. It won't be after the meeting where there's no time. You don't have any idea what you're gonna do.
All right, I do also have one more announcement, which is, if you haven't voted, go vote. Tomorrow's election day, so don't care how you vote, just vote. All right. Any other announcements? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all, thank you for coming on Zoom.